how much money you actually need to retire on dividends. Imagine waking up tomorrow knowing you never had to worry about another paycheck again. Every month, money simply shows up in your account. But here's the question. Nobody answers. How much money do you actually need to make that happen? Today, we're going to calculate it. Most people think retirement is about becoming a millionaire. It isn't. Some people can retire comfortably with less than $500,000. Others could have $2 million and still not have enough. Why? Because retirement isn't about how much money you have. It's about how much money you spend. That's the mistake almost everyone makes. They chase an arbitrary number instead of calculating their number. And once you understand this simple idea, retirement stops feeling like a dream and starts looking like a math problem. Let's prove it. Imagine two people. Sarah spends about $3,000 every month. Mike spends closer to $7,000. Would they need the same investment portfolio? Of course not. Yet that's exactly how most retirement advice is presented. One number, one solution for everyone. It doesn't work that way. Before we talk about dividend stocks, before we talk about ETFs, before we talk about passive income, we need to answer one question. How much income do you actually need every year to replace your paycheck? Because once you know that number, everything else becomes surprisingly simple. Let's make this personal. Forget about million-dollar portfolios for a minute. Forget about what your friends are investing in. Forget about what some financial guru says you need. The only number that matters is yours. Here's how to find it. Start with one simple question. How much money do you spend every month? Not how much you make, not how much you want to make, how much you actually need to live the life you want. Let's use three simple examples. Imagine Emily. She owns her home, has no debt, and lives comfortably on $3,000 a month. That's $36,000 a year. Now meet David. He has a larger family and spends about $5,000 every month. That's $60,000 a year. And finally, there's Michael. He travels often, enjoys a more expensive lifestyle, and needs around $8,000 a month. That's $96,000 every year. Three completely different people, three completely different lifestyles, which means three completely different retirement goals. And this is where most people make their biggest mistake. They ask, how much money do I need to retire? But that's the wrong question. The better question is, how much income do I need every year? Because once you know your annual income target, everything else becomes simple math. Now comes the exciting part. We're going to turn those annual expenses into the exact investment portfolio needed to generate that income through dividends. Now comes the question that changes everything. How much money do you actually need invested to generate that income? The answer depends on just one number. It's called your dividend yield. Don't let the name intimidate you. The idea is incredibly simple. Imagine you invest $100. After 1 year, that investment pays you $4 in dividends. You earned 4%. That's it? That's your dividend yield? Think of it as the income your portfolio produces every year. The higher the yield, the more income your investments generate from the same amount of money. Let's see what that looks like. If you invested $100,000, a portfolio earning 3% would generate about $3,000 per year. A 5% yield would generate $5,000. An 8% yield would generate $8,000. And a 10% yield would generate $10,000 every year. Same investment, completely different income. Now let's go back to Emily. Remember, she needs $36,000 every year to cover her expenses. If her portfolio only earns 3%, she would need roughly $1.2 million invested. But if that same portfolio generated 8%, she would only need about $450,000. That's a difference of nearly $750,000, just by changing one number. Now imagine David. He needs $60,000 per year. At a 3% yield, he would need around $2 million. At 8%, about $750,000. And Michael? He spends $96,000 every year. At 3%, he'd need more than $3.2 million. At 8%, he'd need around $1.2 million. The dividend yield you choose has a massive impact on how much money you need before you can retire. So at this point, you might be thinking, if higher yields mean I need less money, why doesn't everyone just invest in the highest yielding dividend fund they can find? That's a great question. Because this is exactly where most investors make a very expensive mistake. And before you chase a double-digit yield, There's something you absolutely need to understand. If a higher dividend yield means you need less money, why doesn't everyone simply invest in the highest yield fund they can find? Because every investment comes with a trade-off. In investing, there is no free lunch. A higher yield doesn't automatically mean a better investment. Sometimes it simply means you're taking on more risk. Think about it this way. Imagine someone offers you two savings accounts. One pays 3% every year. The other promises 15%. Which one sounds too good to be true? Exactly. The same logic applies to dividend investing. Whenever you see an unusually high yield, your first question shouldn't be, how much can I make? It should be, why is the yield so high? Sometimes it's because the company is struggling. Sometimes the stock price has fallen dramatically. And sometimes the fund is using a completely different strategy to generate income. That's why understanding where the income comes from is just as important as the yield itself. Let's look at two popular examples. SCHD is one of the most respected dividend ETFs. It focuses on high-quality companies with long histories of paying and increasing their dividends. Its yield is usually around 3% to 4%. That means you'll likely need a larger portfolio. But you're investing in financially strong businesses with a long-term growth focus. Now compare that to JEPI. JEPI doesn't just collect dividends from stocks, it also generates income by selling covered call options. That extra income allows it to distribute a much higher monthly yield, often around 7% to 9%. Notice something. Neither of these funds is good or bad. They're simply built for different goals. If your priority is long-term growth, you might prefer a lower yield portfolio. If your priority is replacing your paycheck sooner, you may be willing to accept the trade-offs of a higher yield strategy. The key isn't finding the highest yield. The key is finding the yield that matches your retirement plan. Because remember, our goal isn't to collect the biggest dividend. Our goal is to build an income stream that you can actually depend on for decades. So, how much money do you actually need to retire on dividends? By now, you know the answer depends on two things. First, how much money you need every year to live the life you want. And second, the type of portfolio you decide to build. That's the part most people overlook. Because retirement isn't just about reaching a number. It's about building an investment strategy that you can actually stick with through good markets and bad ones. Some investors are comfortable earning a lower yield in exchange for greater stability. Others are willing to accept more risk for higher monthly income. Neither approach is automatically right or wrong. It all depends on your goals, your timeline, and your tolerance for risk. That's why there isn't one perfect dividend portfolio. There are several ways to build reliable passive income, and each one comes with its own advantages and its own compromises. Today, we didn't just talk about dividends. We answered the question that matters most. How much money do you actually need to retire? And now you know, retirement isn't about chasing a random number like $1 million. It's about replacing your paycheck with reliable income once you know how much you spend every year. And you understand how dividend yield affects your portfolio. You finally have a target. No more guessing. No more unrealistic expectations. Just a clear plan. But here's the thing. Knowing your number is only the first step. The next question is even more important. How do you actually build a portfolio that can generate that income without taking unnecessary risks? That's exactly what we're going to cover next. We'll build 3 real retirement portfolios: a conservative portfolio, a balanced portfolio, and a high-income portfolio. We'll compare them side by side, explain how they work, who they're designed for, and the pros and cons of each one. If you found this video helpful, give it a like. It really helps the channel reach more people who are trying to build financial freedom. And if you don't want to miss the next part of this series, make sure you subscribe. Remember, a little wealth built consistently can become financial freedom. I'll see you in the next one.